For folks who are watching at home, tonight's presentation is going to be translated live in Spanish on a separate Zoom channel. So before we continue, I'd like to just introduce our interpreters who will explain how to access the Spanish translation.
Good afternoon. This webinar will have Spanish language interpretation. We will launch the interpretation feature in a few moments. When we do, you will see a world icon at the bottom of the screen. Click on it and choose your preferred language. I will now say the same instructions in Spanish. Este seminario web contará con la interpretación en español. Lanzaremos la función de interpretación en unos momentos. Cuando lo hagamos, verá un icono de un mundo en la parte inferior de la pantalla. Haga clic en ese icono y elija su idioma preferido. Muchas gracias.
All right, thank you so much. To ensure that everyone has a chance to comment tonight, we're going to do things a little bit different. We have enabled the comment features on the Zoom webinar. So if you do want to leave a question or a comment in the chat box, please feel free to do so. Tonight's the kickoff for this event. It's not the only meeting that we're going to have. And so we want to make sure that even if we can't get to all of the questions tonight, we'll be able to follow up via email to registered attendees with responses to some of the questions that they might have. So really feel free to put your questions in the chat box and to have a dialogue with one another as we work our way through the presentation. We'll also ask several questions during today's presentation with the Zoom polling platform. It's a more in-depth survey that will be guiding you through after the presentation, but we have a couple of comments and questions that are embedded within the presentation that we really wanted to make sure folks had a chance to answer, to make it a little bit livelier, and to make sure that, quite frankly, we're moving in the direction that people want us to move in this discussion. Let's go to the next slide. Today's discussion is primarily designed to generate additional thought, support, and action for what SCTA and RCPA has been working on. RCPA is working specifically to build the climate mobilization strategy and then to start putting that strategy to work across Sonoma County so that we can meet our climate goals. Every single jurisdiction in Sonoma County and the board of directors that represents them have passed climate emergency resolutions. And so the climate mobilization strategy is going to be really key for us meeting those goals. And we're looking to build support for these efforts with your help to define the vision for what a healthy, livable, and climate resilient Sonoma County can and should look like. I don't need to reiterate this to most folks who are on the call, but the time to act is not just now, but was a decade ago. There's no question that climate change is not only happening, but that it's mostly due to human activity. And no matter what part of Sonoma County you live in, the impacts of climate change have been evident, particularly over the last 5 to 6 years. There is not a single person who lives in Sonoma County who hasn't been impacted by climate change in the last couple of years. RCPA and all local jurisdictions have made that commitment to acting. And we are the first county in the nation where every single jurisdiction is on board with our climate emergency resolutions and are actively working towards addressing the climate crisis. Our goal is to not be complacent in the face of the impacts, but to work towards making a positive difference in all of the communities that we serve. Let's go on to the next. Thank you. There is a new UN climate report that was just released since the IPCC report came out as well. It expresses the same warning, but with a little bit more optimism. Taking action can make a real difference, even in the face of overwhelming climate impacts. And I think that that's one of the main takeaways that a lot of us are looking for, is not just a doom and gloom around climate, but what do we have to actually do? How do we take that first step? And how do we put in place a plan that is going to be able to have the lasting impact that we need for our future generations here? In Sonoma County, we've had major climate wake-up calls in the past few years. The record droughts, the water shortages, flooding, record-breaking wildfire seasons. It's brought climate crisis issues to the forefront for most of our jurisdictions, particularly our city councils and the board of supervisors have been discussing this at length through the last couple of years. And we want to see how you have been personally affected by climate change in Sonoma County. So we'll be conducting our first Zoom poll to gauge the specific impacts of climate change for you on your community. And this data is going to be really important for us in terms of how we continue to talk to folks who are not currently at the table about why it's such an important conversation for them to engage with us on. So a Zoom poll will appear. Please let us know your thoughts. And I'm going to also remind folks that you can be commenting in the chat as well on what your answers and responses are. And Jenny, I see your question about enabling the audience to copy the chat. I can have somebody work on that while we are looking at our first poll question. And Ross, are we ready to keep moving through it and see what our poll results look like? So not surprisingly, wildfires is a big one, 88%, water shortages and drought. Again, just like I mentioned with climate action, I don't think that there's a meeting that goes by that most of our jurisdictions aren't talking about water shortages and drought, extreme weather, increased temperatures. So I really appreciate folks taking the time. That's a good amount of folks that have been able to respond back. As I mentioned, we'll send out a full poll later as well, a follow-up. But for now, it's pretty clear that we are feeling the impacts of climate. Each of us are. So let's talk a little bit about how we can better prepare for and address climate impacts here in Sonoma County. And you're here at the start. This is RCPA, and as I mentioned, RCPA has a very unique role. We are the only county jurisdiction that is focused on climate in the state. We're also the only JPA that is representative of every single jurisdiction from Petaluma all the way up to Cloverdale and everything in between. So we have a responsibility and a charge to facilitate collaboration and coordination of climate efforts amongst our jurisdiction. Through our work, we leverage resources, reduce duplicate efforts, coordinate plans, and we make progress faster when we're all working together and looking at it as a cohesive system and not making each of us reinvent our own wheel. Board of Directors, as you saw, is the same as SCTA, the Sonoma County Transportation Authority. It enables that collaboration and accountability across the county. We have members from all 10 jurisdictions. Our oversight of programs ensures a balance of both the city and the county perspectives. And we have advisory bodies as well, folks who are able to lend their support even when they're not in their elected role. We work closely with our partner agencies, and I want to thank a number of them that I do see on: Sonoma Clean Power, Sonoma Water, Ag and Open Space District, Northern Sonoma County Air Pollution Control District, Bay Area Air Quality Management District, and representatives of Sonoma County and the Bay Area Regional Energy Network, BayRAN, who we work very closely with. Now, if it works for folks, I'd like to turn it over to Tanyalinda, the Director of Climate Programs. She can walk us through an overview of the Sonoma Climate Mobilization.
Thank you, Chair Rogers, and good evening, everyone. Thank you so much for being here with us tonight. In March of 2021, the RCPA adopted a new climate strategy called the Sonoma Climate Mobilization. The strategy sets a goal of being carbon neutral by 2030. What does this mean? That we have significantly reduced our greenhouse gas emissions and increased the amount of carbon pulled out of the atmosphere to achieve net zero, absorbing enough carbon to offset any remaining emissions. The climate mobilization strategies are organized into the 4 areas you see here on the slide. Decarbonization, meaning to stop burning fossil fuels to power our homes and buildings and stop sending waste to landfills. Sequestration and ecosystem services, to protect and enhance the green spaces in our cities, towns, and rural areas so that they can absorb more carbon from the atmosphere. Resilience and adaptation to implement solutions that help our community adapt and become more resilient to current and future climate impacts. And equity and community engagement. As a foundation to all of our work on climate, we must engage our entire community in developing equitable solutions that address the needs of everyone in our community, especially those most impacted and least able to respond to the effects of climate change. We'll explore each of these areas in more depth in the next few slides. Next slide, please. So to decarbonize our buildings, we need to first accelerate the electrification of our buildings by phasing out the use of gas as quickly as possible, replacing the gas burning appliances we use to heat our homes, cook our food, and heat water with appliances powered by clean electricity. And then we need to continue cleaning up our electricity supply and move to 100% carbon-free electricity. Here are a few examples of what RCPA and its members and partners are working on to achieve these goals. Adopting all electric reach codes that reduce or eliminate gas in new buildings like those already adopted by the cities of Santa Rosa, Healdsburg, and Petaluma. Identifying policy options and incentives to accelerate the electrification of our existing buildings. And supporting Sonoma Clean Power and Healdsburg Electric in their ongoing efforts to further clean up our electricity supply. Next slide, please. To decarbonize our transportation system, we must first make it easier to get around without a car by shifting trips from driving to biking, walking, and transit, and then rapidly replacing gas-powered vehicles with electric vehicles. And here are a few examples of what RCPA and its members and partners are working on to achieve these goals. Adopting bans on the construction of new gas stations in Sonoma County. 7 of our jurisdictions have either approved bans or are working on bans of new gas stations. Seeking new funding to support the installation of electric vehicle charging stations at multifamily housing and workplaces. And adopting the Sonoma County Vision Zero Action Plan recently approved by the SCTA RCPA board and determining next steps to implement the recommended actions. And later this year, the SCTA will lead the development of a new countywide active transportation plan that will include a focus on creating a network of safe, low-stress bike and pedestrian pathways. Next slide, please. To achieve our goal of zero waste by 2030, we must reduce, reuse, recycle, and compost to eliminate the waste we send to landfills. Zero Waste Sonoma, our local waste management agency, is leading the way on this initiative, developing model ordinances such as disposable food serviceware bans, and working with our local jurisdictions to implement these ordinances. Most Sonoma County jurisdictions have adopted or are in the process of adopting zero waste resolutions and bans on disposable food serviceware and polystyrene foam. Most recently, Zero Waste Sonoma received funding from the County of Sonoma's Climate Resilience Fund to support the development and implementation of a construction, demolition, and deconstruction model ordinance. And a draft of this model ordinance should be available later this year for review. Next slide, please. To increase carbon sequestration and improve the health of our ecosystems, we must first and foremost keep carbon in the ground that we have already managed to pull into the soil and the plants, capture more carbon, and secure the resources that we need to achieve these goals. And I'd like to note that these climate solutions not only sequester carbon, but they have additional benefits for the health of our community. For example, heat reduction, improved air quality, more water retention, and improved soil health, to name just a few. And here are some examples of what RCPA and its members and partners are working on to achieve these goals. We're supporting development of urban forest conservation plans and tree protection ordinances with a focus on maximizing carbon sequestration potential countywide. We're partnering with the Agricultural Preservation and Open Space District, Zero Waste Sonoma, Sonoma and Gold Ridge Resource Conservation Districts, the Carbon Cycle Institute, and Daily Acts to increase carbon sequestration through the application of compost on multiple properties in both our agricultural and community settings. And this project is also funded by the County of Sonoma's Climate Resilience Fund. Next slide, please. To increase our resilience to climate change impacts and adapt to an ever-changing environment, we must increase the resilience of our electrical grid, both to meet our current needs and prepare for increased demands from the electrification of our buildings and transportation systems. And we also need to prepare for the many current and anticipated impacts of climate change. And note that solutions implemented in the other initiative areas also increase our resilience as a community. So one example, increasing the application of compost helps absorb more carbon and improves the ability of soil to hold moisture, which helps lessen the impact of droughts. Our local jurisdictions have developed hazard mitigation and climate vulnerability plans to identify ways to become more resilient and adapt to climate change. RCPA will work with its members and partners to coordinate these efforts where appropriate and help secure resources to implement these plans. Next slide, please. Equity and community engagement must be a fundamental part of how we develop and implement solutions to the climate crisis. We recognize that members of our community who are most impacted by the effects of climate change often don't have the resources needed to respond. We must ensure that the transition to a clean energy economy benefits our entire community, not just those with the most resources. Our CPA is working with SCTA to develop an organizational equity statement to guide our work, and we'll partner closely with local community-based organizations and community members to implement the strategies in the Sonoma Climate Mobilization. Next slide, please. So this concludes our brief overview of the Sonoma Climate Mobilization, and I believe we put into the chat a link to the full strategy document if you'd like to read more. As you can see, we have been working to implement the strategy since its adoption last year, and we have a lot more work to do. We're looking for your feedback to help us identify and prioritize the most important actions to take on our journey to our 2030 goal. At the end of this presentation, we'll provide a link to a survey so that you can share more feedback on what you think are the best ways to tackle the climate crisis. But for now, let's take a brief Zoom poll about how Sonoma County is currently measuring up in these efforts. Next slide, please. So how would you rate our community's level of preparedness for current and future climate change impacts? So please share your thoughts in the Zoom poll. And once you finish the poll, please feel free to add any additional comments in the chat about how you see our level of preparedness and ideas that you have for ways we could become better prepared for future climate impacts. So I'll let it go just another minute. We're getting good responses, and so far it looks like folks feel somewhat prepared. That's better than very unprepared or not prepared, but we'd certainly like to see a much higher score in the very prepared category. So with that, again, please feel free to put any comments in the chat, and I will move us on to our next slide. And at this point, I would like to reintroduce Chair Rogers to take us through the next portion of our slides. Thank you.
I appreciate that. And Alexa, I see your comment about the chat not fully enabled. I checked with staff, it should be. So let's see if you're able to view, if you click on all panelists, or if others are having the same problem, please let us know, because from our perspective, it looks like everybody's able to see one another. Perfect. I'm seeing some folks weigh in here. So I appreciate that, Tonya. Thanks for the really quick overview. A big part of moving forward with climate change efforts for us is going to be to define a shared vision for our community. So I'm hoping we can take a quick moment to get feedback on your vision for a healthy and livable Sonoma County. What Ross is going to do is he's going to put up a link in the chat. If you click on the link, you'll be able to enter words to describe what your vision is for how we move forward. I'm going to give you a couple minutes here to put in some of the answers that you might have. And at the end of this, we'll have a word cloud that we can present to people to talk to them a little bit about what would our shared vision actually look like. And board members, you can feel free to participate in this one as well. And Ross, let's keep moving through the presentation while folks add their words into the word cloud. We'll come back to it and see how things go. But let's talk about a little bit where we go from here. So given the need for us to act now, we need to continue to work with our local partners, whether it be jurisdictional, whether it be some of our groups that I mentioned earlier that I'm very grateful are here tonight, to implement some of our climate solutions with funding that we currently have. And we also are working to increase the funding available for local climate work. We actually have a subcommittee of SCTA, RCPA, that our Vice Chair, Supervisor Hopkins, chairs, that is looking at what we need to do in terms of matching the scope and scale of the problem with the funding to actually achieve that. We'll use this community vision for 2030 that you're putting into your chat right now to guide the work later this year to develop some of those funding options and for climate investment priorities when we look at what substantial greenhouse gas reductions could look like and where to implement first. By 2024, our goal is to have a very clear plan that we all can appreciate and be a part of that will help secure additional local funding for climate solutions. It's similar to SCTA, the way that we've been able to leverage that local action into additional funding from the state and the federal government, I think is going to be particularly key for us. Let's move on. Thanks, Ross. And here's the message that I want to leave with folks who are on this call. We need all of you. There are several ways that you can get involved with the Sonoma Climate Mobilization efforts. The first is an easy one. It's to take the survey that we're going to put in the chat. You can join our mailing list at the survey completion, and then help us to spread the word on social media. As you heard from Tonya, one of the filters, one of the lenses that we need to be using in this conversation is our equity lens. And so it's also helpful for us if there's somebody that you don't see at the table, or if there's a group that you'd like us to present to, please invite us, talk to us, because it's really going to need to be a full forced effort for us to be able to implement this ambitious strategy. Particularly for our community groups that are not engaged, to be able to make that case for why it's important and why their time is worth their effort and what they'll end up getting out of it. All right, Ross, are we ready to see the word cloud? This is live feature from all of the responses. Looks like from 51 responses from people so far on the call about their vision for Sonoma County. Sustainable, equitable, resilient, healthy community. We'll definitely dive into these as well as we move forward in our discussions. And with that, I just want to say thank you. So first, I'm going to bring it back. I'm going to ask for comments, reflections, or questions from board members first, and then I'll come back to the public and we'll do some public comment just to get your thoughts as we move forward. And again, this is just the kickoff for us. This is going to be a big mobilization effort over the next couple of years. And so I hope you'll join us on that journey. And with that, I'll see first from our board. Does anybody have any questions or comments? Let's go with the vice chair.
Thank you, Chair Rogers. I just wanted to check in because we did have a couple of questions in the chat about how best to answer some of those questions. And I saw one question from Steve Pierce, which was kind of what funding options are being considered. And as the chair of that committee, I just wanted to mention that we are extraordinarily early in the process. And so we're really launching that process now to hear kind of what is that vision. And then next year, we really hope to dial in and work collaboratively with the community on different funding strategies that we could implement. So we're really just kicking that off kind of very much tonight and look forward to working with you. But I just in general, I wanted to ask the chair sort of how are we going to handle questions from folks that are very salient to this conversation that we're having.
Absolutely. And Suzanne, do you want to go through while we take a couple of hands from board members and see if there are any other questions while we were doing the presentation that we should circle back on and try to provide answers for?
Will do.
Okay, let's go to Director Bagby, followed by Director Kelly.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chair. I was wondering if Tonya would wish to opine at this time about economic justice where our energy sources are concerned as well, or if we're staying at a little more 40 and 50,000 feet. And if not right now, I'm wondering, when it might be appropriate to get down to the weeds about shifting our energy sources to more sustainably and more environmentally just sources.
So I'm probably still at the higher level now, Director Bagby, but I would say that that's definitely would be a priority. And I would say working with Sonoma Clean Power and Healdsburg Electric as they are looking at increasing the supply of local renewable power, that definitely is something that we would be very interested in supporting and pursuing. So would definitely want to work with our partners on that, but very important point.
Thank you.
Director Kelly?
Thank you, Chair Rogers. I had a question about our Spanish-speaking audience and the word cloud. If we could create a separate link for our Spanish speakers to participate in a word cloud, or if that is accessible. I know when you click the link, the instructions are in English. And then there's also some questions in the chat of people who didn't quite get the instruction that you need. We were asking folks to click on that word cloud link. So I don't know if it's possible to continue to have that open and also come up with a solution that would make it more just from a language access perspective.
Yeah, and Ross, is that link still open, and is there a way for us to do that?
Yes, give me one moment and that will be ready to go and accessible. One moment, please.
Perfect. See no other hands from board members, so while Ross is doing that, I'll bounce back to Suzanne.
All right. So, Mr. Chair, in the chat, there were a couple of sort of logistical questions, but also a question from Pete Gang about how do we participate in this vision of the future, and that we're not clear on that. And I think that's a pretty hard question, yet critical, right? So we're the manner in which to participate, I think, in this process is that this is our maiden voyage. This is our first foray into sort of that public engagement about prioritizing what it is we want our local money to go towards when it comes to climate, and how best to bring people into that discussion. So I think the way for folks to participate is it's incumbent on us as the RCPA and to do more outreach and to get the word out. And then for those folks who are in attendance tonight, I would urge you to reach back out to us if there are groups that we can engage with that you think we may have missed, or that we should engage with, whether we've already done so or not. So I think there's just ample opportunity to participate, and I think there's a lot more to come, as Vice Chair Hopkins said, as we explore what the priorities are, what the funding options might be, and what the local priorities are as we go forward. That was the main question that jumped out, although there was a question about how many people are participating this evening. And I did want to acknowledge that we have 69 attendees in addition to the 19 panelists that are here on the screen. So thank you to those who made time this evening to be with us.
Excellent, thanks, Suzanne. And I did see another question just popped up from one of our participants about, and this is for Tonya, are you using the 2021 ULI report to direct the process?
That's certainly one of the inputs. And in fact, under the resilience and adaptation initiative area, implementing recommendations from that report is a key piece. of the next steps. And so we're really looking to our main sponsors of that effort, the City of Santa Rosa and the County of Sonoma, for any next steps or recommendations that they're most interested in pursuing. And we, of course, are also keeping our eye on opportunities to implement those recommendations. So yes, it is a key part of next steps.
Perfect. And one person asked, can you specifically specific exactly what you mean by local renewable power sources? Does it include solar, wind, geothermal, anything else?
For sure, solar, geothermal, and I would really look to our partners in Sonoma Clean Power and Healdsburg Electric for other types of other sources that they're exploring. But certainly solar and geothermal are key elements.
I think the sub question there, reading between the lines, is about biomass. And so that's a discussion we have frequently at our Sonoma Clean Power Board meetings as well. And then there was one question about educational outreach. And I think if I'm understanding it correctly, outreach regarding transition to electrification, how are we going to go about getting that information out there? And I think that the simple answer is this is the kickoff, and we're asking folks if there's somebody that you think that we should be talking to. And we also have been putting together a list amongst directors on who should be talked to and who should get outreach calls from us. But we're in this together, so let's work on it together. Director Fisher?
Thank you, Chair Rogers. There's a question from Linda in the chat about Cool City Challenge. And as the person who brought that to Petaluma, I would just want to say that anybody in Santa Rosa who's interested, the Cool City Challenge is it's going to be open this summer again to any city in California over 50,000 people with a climate neutrality goal by 2030. So I've already talked to 2 people in Santa Rosa who are interested, and anybody in the audience in Santa Rosa who would be interested, please reach out to me. You can find me on the City of Petaluma website as a council member. Thank you.
Great, thank you. And as the chair of the city's Climate Action Committee, we will be bringing in a discussion about Cool City to our Climate Action Committee in Santa Rosa as well.
Great, I'd love you to invite me and I'll tell you all about it.
Would love to.
Thank you.
One person asked, can you speak to opportunities to meet SB 1383 organic diversion requirements and any work you're doing to reduce methane from landfills? That's a Tonya question.
Yeah, and actually it's really a good question for Zero Waste Sonoma, because they are our key partners in implementing the zero waste efforts. So they're working very closely with local jurisdictions to support their achieving their SB 1383 diversion requirements and offering, solutions and policy ideas to implement that. So RCPA has not been as directly involved in the zero waste conversation as in some of the other areas, but definitely could get more information for those who are interested.
Okay. And then board, I don't see any other hands, and I haven't seen any other questions pop up. We'll come back to the chat, but I do see some hands for public comment. So if folks do want to provide comment, I think for me personally, what would be helpful to hear from folks is what in particular are you interested in prioritizing from the climate mobilization strategy? What groups would you like us to pull into the fold? Or if you're part of a group that would like to be pulled into the fold and get a presentation, happy to do that as well. Let's start with Alexa.
Hi, everybody. Alexa Forrester calling in from Santa Rosa. Thank you so much for this presentation. I'm really excited to see this getting underway, and thank you all for your leadership. I just have 2 things I want to throw in. First, Tonya, I appreciated in your presentation that when you got to the transportation slide, your first point was that we need to make it easy to get around without a car. And I agree about that, but I don't see that that's been the focus so far in terms of the work that's been done. I know that this is all very new, so being fair, I know that's a priority going forward, but I really think that the mode shift needs to be prioritized over the fuel shift, and particularly investing in making buses a first choice and cars a last choice is where we need to get to. I know we've got a long road to get there, and it needs to happen piece by piece, but I would like to see buses, bikes, pedestrians, trains, all of that be the first choice for people getting around, and single user vehicles as a last resort. The other thing I want to mention is that my husband and I we got our PG&E just came and removed our gas line a couple months ago after a 7-year process of electrifying our home one appliance at a time. And we were very happy to do that, but it was hard for us. And we are well educated and have some disposable income and have time to think about things like this. We also participated in our city's Cash for Grass program, which was very helpful because the city provided incentives and also support about how to go about removing our lawn and replacing it. So what I would love is for citizens to have access to guidance, like contractors or people that can help them with the electrification process, and maybe also some incentives. We did take advantage of some of the electrification incentives. Thank you for those of you who played a part in putting those in place. Anyway, I'll stop now, but those are the two things I wanted to throw into the conversation. Thank you.
Great. Thank you so much, Alexa. Really appreciate you being here. We do have a comment in the chat from Carol Hart. And thank you, Carol, for all of your work on this. But she said, wanted to make sure everyone is aware of the natural and working land strategy being prepared by the county. It will provide a great roadmap for natural and working land projects to reduce emissions and sequester carbon, as well as make our city and county resilient to climate change impacts. So again, thank you for your work on that, Carol. Let's go to Thomas.
Oh, hi. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Yes, this is Thomas, and I kind of did send in a question on the chat that was hoping to stimulate conversation about pump storage hydro at Lake Sonoma and possibly at Lake Pillsbury. I think because there is such a vertical drop between the Eel and the Russian, you could put a lower pool at the bottom of the pipeline from Van Arsdale down into the Russian River. That's a very steep drop there. And you could pump back up potentially into Lake Pillsbury. It's an opportunity. It already has the power. You could just, it would really change the run of the river tremendously. Be a very, very interesting thing to offer. Would be pump storage hydro there, as well as potentially at Lake Sonoma for storage, battery storage. Essentially, it's a very incredibly efficient battery. And there's no, the best benefit is that there's, for instance, an offline storage like at what would occur at or even both of them really would be essentially offline from that standpoint. They have no toxics involved with them like batteries. There's no hazards or hazardous materials or anything like that with regard to them. So those are the benefits.
All right, thank you so much, Thomas.
Thank you.
Kevin, go ahead.
Yes, thank you. The thing I would like to see everybody be thinking about and focused on, and I'm a broken record on this, but it's the way that the government has to operate. Many years ago, I attended a summit. I guess it was an all-day thing that the RCPA sponsored when there was different leadership back then, but there were many powerful people there. I remember Susan Gorn was there and Jake McKenzie, and it was all of these things that we are talking about, vision and solutions and how to implement things was all brought up. And this was many years back. And I'm just curious to know whether or not the carbon emissions in our county have really, if the needle has been moved much. Even from way back in those days, we talk a lot about vision. Seems to me we go over and over our vision. Pete Gang and Emmett Hopkins put together a very excellent website on Imagine Sonoma County, where all of these visions were very well articulated. People could add to them, And as I went through that, it gave me a lot of hope and excitement because the visions are really wonderful. But it seems like the skids have never been greased properly for government to respond to the emergency that we're experiencing. I listened into the charter committee review meetings, and I understand that, that it's only every 10 years that this process occurs, and that I guess that the thing can be changed if the council votes on it, and then it goes before the public for public hearings, and then maybe we can review the charter a little more often. But that, to me, that's what I'm talking about government moving so slowly as to be completely ineffective. It's like like the house is on fire, and we're gonna have a meeting to take a vote on whether or not we should be bringing out the fire extinguishers. It has to change. There has to be some way that our county can be a leader in really reviewing the way a government can respond in the face of an emergency. So that would be the creative thinking I would like to see this group, very powerful and people that I admire so much, be really putting their heads together and see what can be done about that. Thank you.
Thank you, Kevin. I appreciate the sentiment for sure. And I think that's what we're trying to figure out how to do, is how do we all move faster in the same direction and work together to amplify one another. I'll ask Tonya in a second to give an update on sort of to your question about moving the needle. We're in the process of evaluating exactly that. I'll let her talk about that. But first, I wanted to point out for D, because I saw your question pop back up about biomass. I see that Melanie, the former chair for Sonoma Clean Power, has shared Sonoma Clean Power's power source mix, a link into the chat so that you can look at that for yourself. I see that Ariel Kelly has also provided Healdsburg's power mix in as a link so that folks can look at that if they're located in Healdsburg or if they're curious to see what other jurisdictions are doing. Tonya?
Yes, thank you, Chair Rogers. So in terms of measuring our progress, the last greenhouse gas inventory for our local emissions that we completed for the community as a whole was for the year 2018. And in that inventory, we found that we had dropped 13% below our 1990 levels, and that the majority of that decrease was really attributable to Sonoma Clean Power and Healdsburg Electric cleaning up their electricity supplies. So we made huge progress on the building energy side, but now we need to tackle the other part of the building equation, which is our use of natural gas. And so that's the area that we're really focusing on as a next step. And then we are currently working on the greenhouse gas inventory for our 2020 emissions and plan to release that this summer. So we will be able to share an update with the community about our progress and evaluate where we still need to do more work. So that's coming up this summer.
Thank you, Tonya. And Linda, I see your question about saving the chat. I think you can highlight and Control C the entire thing. I think that'll work. But what might be better, and if it works for you, is I can have staff capture it, and maybe part of this process is we create a questions asked page where folks can then sort of see what people are, or capture the dialogue, capture the ideas, capture the questions, some way for us to be able to continue to build on that as we go. And Jenny's saying that Control C is not working. So we'll figure that out for sure. We'll make a resource available to folks.
We will definitely capture the chat and make that part of the sort of meeting notes from this for sure.
Perfect. Let's go to Steve then.
Thank you, Chair Rogers and members. Steve Bertelbaugh with the Transportation Land Use Coalition. I sent you all a little description of what we feel is necessary in order to reduce the amount of driving and therefore the amount of greenhouse gases that we produce. Our shift to electric vehicles is going to be an important factor in reducing greenhouse gas emissions, but it's not going to get us all the way there. We're going to have to reduce driving. I expect that the report on our greenhouse gases are going to show a dip in driving during the pandemic, but it seems that people are returning to a lot of driving now, and the trend has got to be downward. I would like to see some predictions about how fast we need to reduce our driving. Last summer, the Sierra Club predicted that they were going to be a reduction of about 5 to 6% per year. I'd like to see how the electric vehicle shift may affect that goal. And thank you for all that you're doing. It's time is short. We need to move fast. Good luck.
Thank you so much, Steve. Let's go to ZG.
Hey everyone, this is Zyra Garcia here, community organizer in Petaluma. I just wanted to do a quick plug-in that the Sonoma County Sunrise Movement, which is our youth leaders here, are doing a quick ask, which is increase bus service hours, increased bus frequency, and fare-free bus access for youth and beyond within Sonoma County. I also would like to see more collaboration. As you've noticed, Petaluma has done a really great job in being climate leaders, specifically with the Cool City Challenge. I also appreciate that they also are very mindful in terms of language access by hiring and paying bilingual program directors as well. And the next thing is just curious in terms of Sonoma Clean Power and other organizations of, like, for example, right now, how many Spanish speakers are actually using the interpretation services? If we can gather more data just to make sure that we have something that we measure if we are reaching out to those that are underserved. And those were my 2 cents, and appreciate this presentation. Thanks so much.
I appreciate that, ZG. And I can check with Suzanne and Ross, who are running the presentation. But I think when we ran into this in Santa Rosa, I think we asked that question, how many people were on the English and how many were on the Spanish, and how is it usable for people? And I think the answer we got from Zoom is that you don't know, that it doesn't distinguish between the two. But I'll check with Ross and see.
We'd be able to find that out after the fact. I don't have the metrics on it right now.
Okay, but we can look at it after the fact at least?
I believe so.
Okay, perfect. Okay, and I see a question from Linda. Going electric for existing homes and buildings is a real challenge and a significant expense. Is there a resource to help multifamily housing complexes evaluate, pursue, and fund this change? So that is one of the $50,000 questions, which is about the amount that I've heard from folks it takes per unit. That's one of the things that I'm particularly interested in us figuring out, is as we talk about how do we fund our climate goals and how to, particularly our strategies for reductions in greenhouse gas emissions. I think that, Linda, I think you're asking exactly one of the key questions, which is from both an equity lens as well as a carbon reduction lens, how do we get this into multifamily homes as well? And so I don't have a good answer for you, but we can definitely come back and talk more about it. And I know that it's something that Sonoma Clean Power has been particularly interested in trying to solve, and have a couple of pilots that are out there as well. Let's go to Terry.
Terry, you're on mute.
Do you hear me now?
Yes, we can. Go ahead.
My audio says it's on.
Yeah, Terry, we can hear you. Can you hear me?
Okay. About buses. Obviously, a big factor in our carbon is tourists. So my suggestion is that for funding electric buses or working with SMART to bring people into the county for events, that there be a charge for an event permit, which would help to fund those buses. And I'm old enough that I can remember how the United States reacted to World War II, and the public was expected to do all kinds of things, even saving bacon fat. And the attitude that people get from what is being put out by agencies like yours is, we're going to solve these problems through ordinances and in Congress and international action. And it's not happening. As a registered engineer, I remember reading about climate and chemical and engineering news back in about 1960 from a New Zealand researcher. I've been trying to follow it ever since, and we're just not doing it, folks. And I really recommend the book Power by Richard Heinberg, and he has a long list, like buying less stuff. And one of the things on his list is less babies. And of course, that's politically anathema, but we've got to face up to the fact that we can't go on growing the number of people in this world indefinitely. Thanks a lot.
Thank you so much, Terry. So far, me and my fiance are doing our part on that last part, as my mom reminds me all the time. I do see, I want to appreciate a comment related to the translation, particularly with jargon. And that's a good reminder, I think, for all of us to try to use less jargon for folks who aren't used to our meetings or aren't used to this discussion. It is a way that I think will pull more people in for the conversation. Let's go to Pete.
Thank you. I have a few short comments. First, thank you, Chair Rogers and board members, for being willing to engage the wider community on these really, really tough topics. Yeah, it's not easy. One point I just wanted to make is that in talking about our countywide emissions, we are used to talking about our activity-based emissions. And that only tells part of the story. The other big part is our consumption-based emissions, the emissions that result from the food, clothing, material goods, and services that we all consume. And at some point, we have to be willing to engage with the wider community about our consumption-based emissions. I wanted to just echo also Kevin's point about the speed of government, which I think we're all pretty much in agreement that the current speed of government is not well suited to the urgency of the climate crisis. Somehow we have to figure out how to act, how to respond to an emergency in an appropriate way. And the last thing I just wanted to give voice to is the idea that when I look at possible climate-related policies that are within local control, that have potential big benefit, the one that rises to the top is safe streets, active transportation, complete streets. The idea of putting in place a complete and integrated bike ped transportation that makes it possible for people of all ages and abilities to easily get around without a car. We have not really taken this on as a goal. We're still very much immersed in car culture, and we have to transition to a people culture, still acknowledging that there will be cars. Thank you for taking this on.
Thanks, Pete, and thanks for all your work on it as well. Board, that's the last hand that I see, so I'll go ahead and bring it back. Staff has been taking notes. I do see other suggestions that have popped up in the chat, including Mary, thank you for the suggestion about working with some of our faith-based communities as well. I think you have a very good group of folks who want to make a difference on the RCPA board. I think there's room for us to continue to have conversations about how to make government move faster. I definitely hear and agree with that point. I think that there's a lot of good questions that we've had tonight that start the conversation. And I think that we're all looking forward to the next steps, Tonya, in terms of prioritization, how we get moving, and then how we fund to an adequate level the projects and the programs that we need to do to meet our goals. With that, I'll turn it back to the board and see if anybody has any closing thoughts, anything you heard, any suggestions on where you'd like to go next. And I just want to thank everybody who's sent in already their suggestions on who else we should be engaging to pull people in on the conversation. Madam Vice Chair.
Thank you, Chair Rogers. I just wanted to encourage folks to continue to send us feedback, including feedback about how to better engage. I think that we are always learning, and this is kind of a first-time process for us in terms of looking at developing a potential climate funding measure and really launching this community visioning conversation. So, I appreciate everyone showing up tonight. And I would just say that our email inboxes are open, and we'd love to hear from you with respect to, how can we go about having better polls and better opportunities for you to share some of your priorities as we go forward on this path together. So thank you very much, Chair, for leading an excellent meeting, and I look forward to the next steps to come.
All right, let's go to Director Fisher.
Yeah, I just want to add on to that anyone in the audience that wants a presentation by our organization, to please reach out to Tonya and say, I want you to come talk to my group about what you're doing. So if you would, please, thank you. And thank you all for being here tonight.
And I will do, just as a quick privilege, because he hadn't spoken yet, I do see that Rick has put his hand up as well. I want to make sure everybody gets a chance to speak tonight so no one feels neglected. Let's go to Rick really fast, and then we'll wrap up.
Thank you, Chair Rogers. I just wanted to put it in a good word for moving more freight by rail. This is something that didn't come up tonight, but it's not just our cars that generate greenhouse gases. Trucks do so too. And it turns out that trucks are very inefficient at moving freight compared to railroads. A railroad is about 3 to 4 to 5 times as efficient in terms of how much of greenhouse gas is emitted per ton mile. There's lots of other advantages, I think, to moving freight by rail instead of truck. There's much less damage to highways. There's the safety factor and so on. But I just wanted to throw that into the mix. I think we should be thinking more about developing the capacity to move freight by rail.
I appreciate that. Thank you so much, Rick. All right, I'll bring it back. And Director Bagby.
Yeah, just to comment on Rick's participation. Appreciate your participation, Rick, at all of my meetings, and I would bring everyone's attention to the last SMART meeting where we were reviewing a white paper prepared by SMART staff advocating a vision for Highway 37. And I think it is so important that we, at this level, talk about heat pumps, talk about electric cars and electric car infrastructure, talk about how do we help homeowners electrify their homes and get off of transition off of natural gas. But at the same time, you know, the advantage of being a regional body like this is that we can engage in a much larger vision, and a very important part of our climate resiliency and our economy is the Highway 37 white paper that's been supported, that's been created by SMART, that really creates a vision for climate resiliency for that corridor, which is essential to our economy. It's essential to our connectivity to the rest of the Bay Area as well as Sacramento. And it really is a vision for freight, connecting you know, Sonoma County once again with the national freight network, connecting us to Amtrak and connecting us via passenger rail, ensuring that we will be able to move cars, trucks, and people that we need to on a highway, but also, you know, creating a multimodal pathway and bicycle pathway, pedestrian pathway that will, you know, hopefully connect all of our regional trails as well, so that it will, you know, create connectivity. I don't know how practical it might be for some people to commute using it, but it certainly would be an important part of our tourism plans and our ecotourism plans for our future. So I would ask people to be sure to, you know, support those kinds of big vision projects that are so essential to the health and well-being of our community. I would also encourage folks who are in the housing equity realm to really emphasize the importance of transportation as well as being absolutely essential to housing equity, because so much of the percentage of our paychecks of working people and working families go not only to housing, but to transportation. And if we're really going to leverage the investment in transportation that we've made, we have got to accelerate that connection and the changing of how we plan our communities and how we do our infill in our communities. So I'm hoping that folks will be engaging on that, and that will be an essential part of our climate conversation moving forward. And so please do go to the SMART website and pull down the packet from our last meeting. You can help me with that date, Chris. I don't remember exactly what the date was, but pull down that white paper and it gives you a real vision for, you know, where we need to go to make sure that that Highway 37 connection is resilient and usable for future generations.
Great, thank you so much. Any other comments, directors? Any last thoughts, Suzanne?
I don't think so, Mr. Chair. Thank you very much to the participants and to the board for their attention to this.
Yeah, thank you so much. So we will have Ross share the survey link and folks will get that. We ask you to participate in it. We really appreciate that. Our word cloud is still up, as I understand it, and we can definitely make sure that that is made available to the public as well on our website going forward. Okay, and with that, we'll go ahead and we're going to adjourn. I'll leave. I'll make sure staff leaves up the Zoom link for a couple of minutes here, so folks can click on these last links and fill out your surveys if you'd like to. I also want to do a big thank you to all of the staff that participated today. Everyone from our fantastic translators to all the way at the top, Suzanne filling in as our clerk for the board. I want to thank everybody for participating and thank you to the public for joining us tonight.